What does far right actually mean? It's a precise. Is it a precise ideological category, or is it a relative term hurled at any politician who veers from liberal consensus? Some use it loosely as a smear, others define it rigorously: nationalism, nativism, hostility to pluralism, rejection of established institutions, and often a conspiratorial view of power. But it's not a place on the map. It's a tendency in politics, one that can stretch across democracies and resurface when crises expose social fractures, and of course it's got nuances of the 1930s all over it. Nigel Farage operates on the boundary of that spectrum. He would never call himself far right. He prefers common sense, patriotism, defending ordinary people. Yet his politics resonate with movements internationally that sit firmly on the far right, that sit firmly in that space. His naming of Reform UK after Preston Manning's Canadian Reform Party was no accident. It was a signal that he intended to do what Manning did not: displace Britain's Conservatives and inherit their voters. Unlike Manning, who yielded to Stephen Harper, Farage wishes to be a beneficiary, not the midwife of a political transformation. Consider his summer theatrics. Farage went fishing in the Channel, not for mackerel but for headlines about small boat crossings. His message is simple: Britain's borders are broken, Britain's politicians are weak, and only Farage dares to say what ordinary people think. It's a classic populism, but it overlaps with far-right tactics, turning human beings into dinghies, into symbols of national decline, rallying protesters outside asylum seeker hotels. This is where definitions matter. Far-right is not just a slur, it's content. It's about normalising anger into activism. We see it in Operation Raise the Colours, the campaign to plaster St George's crosses across towns. On the surface, patriotism. You can't challenge it. Beneath it, coordination by Britain First, Tommy Robinson, and splinters of the BNP. That you can challenge. The symbolism is not neutral. It's deliberately intimidating to minorities and migrants, and when mainstream politicians Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch and Yes Farage endorse the flags, even if disavowing the extremists, they grant legitimacy to the far right's theatre. But, you have to be careful about this. I endorse the flags. I think the flags are a great thing. But I don't endorse the far right. And that's the problem. Because the right is using the vocabulary and the language of perfectly normal conversation, it is hijacking the centre ground and pulling it over to the right. Reform's Birmingham conference next month will show how far this process has gone. A quasi-shadow cabinet, slogans of broken Britain, and proposals of mass deportations on charter flights. The rhetoric is not that of pragmatic conservatism, it's radical, performative, designed to shock. And Farage even borrows from the French Nouvelle Droite and the French New Right and the American National Conservatives with talk of steel subsidies, wartime renationalisation and cultural battles. It's not fascism, but it's an ideological bricolage that appeals to the same resentments. The village is burning, and only by torching the institutions can it be saved. There's also the problem of moral language in politics. We've entered a phase where opponents accuse Farage of being on the side of paedophiles for opposing the Online Safety Act. That's what one might call sensory smearing, moral shaming, so hyperbolic that it closes down debate. But the danger is twofold. On the one hand, it unfairly demonises opponents. On the other, it lets Farage pose as the victim of censorship and further feeding his populist persona. The far right thrives not because Britain is uniquely intolerant, but because trust has collapsed in government. The trust has collapsed in the responses to asylum, to housing, to economic fairness. Into this vacuum steps Farage with simple answers: deport them, close the borders, restore control. These are not solutions. These are slogans, but they work when the state appears paralysed. But the long-term trends in British society are not with him. Younger generations are more tolerant across ethnic and religious lines than their parents. The family of Baby King, murdered in Southport, have condemned the exploitation of their grief by the far right. There's still a silent majority who see through the manipulation of Farage and his cohorts. So where does this leave us? With the need for moral clarity, we shouldn't call every nationalist fascist, but nor should we ignore the overlap between Farage's project and the machinery of the far right, nor should we should try to reclaim the language that is being used by Farage and his friends. His movement is not simply a protest party, it's an attempt to reshape conservatism, to pull it into a more radical exclusionary form. And the task for mainstream politics is not to imitate him, which is exactly what the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are doing, not to smear him, but to show competence, fairness and humanity in governing and in dealing with migration and in dealing with identity. Otherwise, the flags on lampposts will not be the end of it, it will only be the beginning. Farage rides the current. So we must ask, is he steering the boat or is he being swept into darker waters by those who have always wanted Britain to close in on itself? The answer will determine whether this country remains confident in its tolerance or succumbs to the very forces that it once so famously resisted.